Afternoon, ladies and gents. Right, so that's the motor back in the bike now. I've just fitted it just now this morning, and I don't have a proper engine stand to or engine lift to lift the engine back into the bike, and it's quite difficult to get it back in without a stand, but it is possible. And unfortunately I don't have this on video because I also don't have a GoPro or any kind of action cam at the moment. I've only got my camera, my phone, so it's not on camera, but I have taken some photos and I'll put those in a slideshow at some point of the process. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to explain basically how I fitted the motor into the bike without using a proper engine lift. So basically what I did was, the motor was loose, kind of on the floor like that one, and what I did was I lifted it onto this crawler, which is a crawler that is meant to be used for crawling under a car, and as you can see it's got casters on it, but I used it basically to move the motor under the bike. And I also used some bits of wood to get it to the right height, because the crawler by itself wasn't getting the motor anywhere near the height that I needed it to bolt it into the chassis. So I used these big blocks of wood, I used that, and I used some of these bits. So that was like the front of the motor was on there, on the big bit, and the back of the motor, see like the sump bit that sticks down, that was sitting on a couple of those thinner bits, which in turn was sitting on these rails at the back. And the front of the motor, which is like the front end of the sump just behind the oil, front end of the sump just behind the oil filter there, that was sitting on that bit. You can kind of see the marks of where it was. These are bolts from the underneath the sump that made these, I think. So that's basically how I did it. So motor on there, and what I did was I had it lined up by the side of the bike, and then I basically just kind of like rolled it under the bike, and I rolled it under slightly forward of where it needs to be, so that like the basically the whole top end of the motor kind of cleared these brackets and the underside of the chassis, so it was rolled in kind of like just right behind the front wheel. And then what I did was I moved it back about 4 or 5 inches until the holes lined up, and then basically I started getting one bolt in at a time. It was really awkward. I got this one in first because this one just happened to kind of line up right, and then that meant that bolt was taking part of the weight. I didn't put the nut on initially, I just got the bolt in, and that kind of held that corner in place. And then I tried to get that one in, but that one was really awkward. I couldn't get it in. It was like, it looked like it was lined up just about right, but I was pushing the bolt in and it was just going tap, tap, tap on the end of the motor, and it wasn't going. So I left that one for a bit, and what I did was I put the spindle bolts in, which is this one. As you can see, it's got the spanner on the end at the moment. So I put that through, put it through the collar, this spacer thing, which is now tight because I tightened it up. Put it through, and again I didn't put the nut on initially, I just put it in so it's at least holding it at one side. So the motor is essentially held in 2 places at one side, which is kind of able to take part of the weight then. And then what I did was I got the third spindle bolt in, which is that one there, and it's kind of really hard to see this one, but it goes basically right through and comes out the other side, sort of idea. So again, put that spindle bolt on, and then once I had all that in, I had a bit of a wrestling match with the whole thing to try and get this one to line up. This one just didn't want to line up right, and I kind of like jiggled the whole bike about on the stand, moved the stand this way and that, turned the steering, the handlebars kind of backwards and forwards, and you know, just everything. And in the end what I did was I noticed that there was a bit of a gap. None of that really worked, none of that kind of jiggling, turning the steering or any of that stuff got it to line up. I tried and tried, but I couldn't get it to line up. So it's worth noting actually that, see, you kind of assume that anything that's made of metal, steel or aluminium, it's kind of engineered so that everything has to line up perfectly or it won't go in. That's not entirely true. There is actually a bit of kind of give in these kind of bolt holes, so you can have a couple of bolts in and the motor's still not quite at the right angle in the chassis, if you know what I mean, so things are still not lining up quite right. So what I did in the end, what I noticed in the end was when I was struggling with it to get it to line up, I noticed I had a gap on either side of this, a little gaps, maybe about, I don't know, a quarter of an inch or an eighth of an inch or something at either end of that spacer. So what I tried just pulling the whole motor, because at that point the motor was still sitting on the crawler and the wood. So what I did was I kind of grabbed the motor and the crawler, sort of one in each hand, and just like kind of pulled it as hard as I could in this direction, sort of out from the bike. And what that did was that closed these two gaps and made it kind of sit tight like it was, like it is now. And then I just basically went round the other side, grabbed this side of the motor, lifted it a little bit, and managed to get it lined up, and then just knocked the bolt in with my knee. Or I think actually I managed it with one hand, and one hand, I can't remember, one hand on the bolt or whatever. So it was all a bit of a struggle, that one. But I did manage it, but I have managed it. It's in. It's held with 2 bolts, and I've put the nuts on now. I've tightened them up with the ratchet, but I haven't torqued them to the specified torque. I still need to do that. Ditto with this bolt, that's in, and there's a nut on there. You can't see it because it goes into this bracket thing, but it's under there. Nuts on. I haven't torqued it. I've still got to torque it. I've got one of those bolts in. I've still got to put the other bolt in, and the other nuts on there, and I've still got to torque that. So it's basically in. It just all needs kind of, you know, finishing off and torquing and whatnot. And then after that, it's basically a question of do all the reassembly. I've put the chain on loosely. I've still got to get the chain on properly onto the back sprocket and tension that. Obviously, I've still got to put on the exhaust, the cooling hoses, the radiator, refill it with water, put on the oil filter, fill it with oil, connect up all the loom, put on the carbs, connect up the vacuum hoses. Basically, there's still a ton of work. There's still an absolute ton of work to do to get it all done. So it's unlikely that I'll actually have it running today. I might do, depending how it goes. We'll see. But if I can't get it done today, I'll just have to do a bit each day through the week when I'm home from work, after work or whatever. But making progress anyway, that's the main thing. Right, so thanks very much for watching.